All right, welcome to our 8th lesson for Unit 1. In this lesson, we're going to talk about primary productivity. So the learning goal, I know it's a long one, is that you'll be able to describe the concept of primary productivity and its importance to both ecosystems and humans, and then also how we as humans have an impact on an ecosystem's or surrounding areas' primary productivity. So what is primary productivity? Primary productivity is the rate at which producers, which are typically plants, things that photosynthesize in an ecosystem, convert sunlight into chemical energy through photosynthesis and store it as biomass. Because remember, any productivity, any energy that comes into an ecosystem is typically going to be from this photosynthesis. So it is the basis for all productivity in that ecosystem. So high primary productivity means lots of plant growth. The more plants you have, the more species that can eat, the more organisms that can eat those plants, which means the more organisms you can really have. So more plant growth means that there's more food and also more shelter for other organisms. And because of that, when we look at ecosystems that have a really high primary productivity, they're going to have very high biodiversity typically. So this is the first part in this class where we're going to have a little bit of math, which I know is not everyone's favorite, but we can do it. So the equation for primary productivity is primary productivity, which can also be written as PP, equals gross primary productivity, GPP, minus respiration loss. So it's kind of like this is the total or this is the difference. So if you've ever gotten a paycheck, you have your gross income and then taxes are taken out and then you have your net income. So this is kind of the net primary productivity. This is all of the photosynthesis that happens and this is the cost the plant has to pay. So respiration loss, that RL, is the energy that plants have to use to live. So even though plants are doing photosynthesis and bringing all this energy into an ecosystem, they also have to live themselves. Plants go through cellular respiration. They are able to make their own food. They create that glucose or whatever sugar that they're making with that photosynthesis, but then they have to then use some of that sugar as cellular respiration to grow, reproduce, and live. So that's their respiration loss. And then gross primary productivity is the total amount of solar energy that plants are able to capture and convert into chemical energy, typically glucose, through photosynthesis. So all of the energy that they capture and convert. So when we need to calculate primary productivity, we are finding the difference between those two things. So why is primary productivity important? So it forms the base of the food chain. So any organism beyond a plant, they cannot make their own food, us included. We need plants to survive. Even if you eat primarily meat, the meat that you eat had to eat a plant or had to eat something that had to eat a plant. Plants form the base of every single food chain. Even in the ocean where we don't have a ton of plants, it's the phytoplankton that are photosynthesizing, being eaten by the zooplankton, being eaten by krill, being eaten by whales, and all of the things. Photosynthesis is the base of almost every single ecosystem, except for very some places deep in the ocean. But most, like 98%, it is photosynthesis. Also, we want to breathe. We want to be able to do cellular respiration. So we need oxygen through that photosynthesis. We also just talked about the carbon cycle. So we need photosynthesis for carbon cycling. That's how we get CO2 out of the atmosphere. One of the ways we get CO2 out of the atmosphere is plants doing photosynthesis. And it also supports ecosystems and human survival. So we need plants to eat. We also need plants to live our lives. Many organisms, creatures live in some sort of plant life. Most of our houses are made out of, at least to some degree, wood, which is going to come from plants. So we need plants for ecosystems to survive and for us to survive. So when we talk about primary productivity, again, it is how much photosynthesis is happening. So we need to know what factors are going to possibly affect that primary productivity. And if you are very confident and comfortable with the process of photosynthesis, these are probably not going to be the biggest surprise. But plants need light to photosynthesize. So if there's not as much light available, they're not going to be able to do as much photosynthesis. Temperature, so if you've taken chemistry already, temperature can affect how quickly chemical reactions are happening. If it's really cold, chemical reactions are going to be slower or require more energy input. And if it's a little warmer, those reactions are going to happen more easily. But if it gets too hot, then they also can't happen. Plants also need water. They need H2O to go through that process of photosynthesis. So if there is no water, there is not going to be much photosynthesis happening. And then also nutrient availability. Just like us, plants need nutrients to survive, not just water and CO2 and oxygen, but they need phosphorus, they need nitrogen, they need minerals, or else their cells are not going to be healthy enough for the plant to continue to live. All right, so let's dig a little bit deeper into each one of those factors. So for light availability, light is the energy source for photosynthesis. It affects primary productivity in aquatic ecosystems and shaded terrestrial areas. So out in the world and the nature that we see around us in Oklahoma, sunshine is going to hit a lot of those plants. Even the plants that are in shade, they're not getting as much light, but they are getting some. But if we talk about the ocean, light only gets so deep into that water. So photosynthesis can't happen in a lot of the ocean, in most of the ocean. It's only in a thin layer on top, fairly thin layer on top. So temperature influences the rate of chemical reactions, including photosynthesis, and it's the ideal temperature varies by species. Water is also needed for photosynthesis. Droughts can reduce primary productivity in terrestrial ecosystems because, again, plants need that water to go through photosynthesis. And then nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus are essential for plant growth, and their availability affects primary productivity because if a plant can't grow, if a plant doesn't have the nutrients it needs, it can't survive, it can't do photosynthesis. So in this class, we talk about the human impacts on everything. We have also had an impact on primary productivity. So one big one is deforestation. Old growth trees, they are carbon sinks. They do a lot of photosynthesis. When we cut them down, they can no longer serve that role. So not only are they no longer allowed to do or able to do primary productivity, photosynthesis, they also are going to possibly cause the collapse of that ecosystem as a whole because that support is no longer there. That habitat, that food, gone. Agriculture is another big one. So large-scale agriculture depletes nutrients and can lead to soil degradation. When we plant crops like this on big patches of land, and it's a monoculture when we plant one thing, that crop is just going to take and take and take all of the nutrients that are there, and eventually it kills the soil. We'll talk about agriculture in an entire unit, basically, but just now, the common agriculture is killing the soil, which in the future is going to reduce that primary productivity. Pollution is another one. So excess nutrients, which is eutrophication, can harm aquatic ecosystems. And yes, this is green. Yes, these things are photosynthesizing, but they're also using all the nutrients. They're taking all the oxygen out of the water, and it's collapsing that ecosystem, so it's not going to be as healthy and as productive as it would be without this happening. And then climate change. So climate change alters the temperature and precipitation patterns, which impacts productivity. Again, the temperature that a plant is in is going to affect how much photosynthesis it can do. And then if it's getting rain, not getting rain, that's going to affect it as well. Plants need that water to do photosynthesis. And if there's not any, can't do it. If there's too much water, then it could also kill the plant. All right. And then why do we as humans care about primary productivity? Food. We need food. We need, even if you don't just eat vegetables, if you are eating meat, the meat that you eat needs to eat plants in order to live. So primary productivity is a source of our food supply for both crops and livestock. And then oxygen. Photosynthesis provides the oxygen that we breathe. We would not be able to live, even if we figured out a way to eat without needing these plants. We need this gas that they give off. And then our resources, we talked about this a little bit earlier, but biomass, which is just any mass that was once living, so wood would be one, from primary productivity is used in industries like timber and biofuels. Medicine, a lot of the medicinal compounds that we use are currently derived from or used to be derived from plants before we created them artificially in a lab. And then the economy, and this goes kind of back to the resources one, but in the economy, agriculture and forestry sectors depend on primary productivity. If our plants are not, if our resources are not able to do photosynthesis and we have less trees and we have less crops, one, we would be struggling to eat. But also our economy would be affected because these businesses would no longer be able to sell those goods. So in conclusion, primary productivity is the foundation of ecosystems, which represents the energy flow from sunlight to biomass. And again, biomass is any living thing that takes up space, once living thing. Understanding the factors affecting primary productivity help us appreciate its significance. Human activities like deforestation, agriculture, and pollution impact primary productivity and ecosystem health. And primary productivity is vital for human survival, providing food, oxygen, resources, medicine, and economic stability. If you have any questions, please let me know, and I will see you in the next one.